The Vermona PerFourmer is probably one of my favorite synths that I have in my studio. For what I do, the music I make, it does pretty much everything I want it to do. It sounds beautiful. It does have its limitations, which I'll get to later in the video, but they weren't enough for me to stop picking one up and from falling in love with it. I'm really surprised that I don't see more videos about it, leading me to believe that it's one of the most underrated, or maybe more accurately, at least one of the most overlooked synths made in the last 15 years. Hi, I'm Ryan from Amberell. The PerFourmer was released in 2011. So why am I making a video about a synth that is just about 15 years old? Well, one reason is because I didn't really get into synthesis until a few years ago. So I didn't know it existed. I saw a video by Ura here on YouTube a while back, and he was playing one, and just the look of it immediately caught my eye. I hadn't seen anything like it. It seemed like an instrument that kind of begged you to interact with it. But the main reason is because still 15 years after its release, I think it's an amazing synth that stands the test of time. Now, it might sound like it, but this video isn't sponsored by Vermona. All these opinions are my own. I just wanted to share my experiences with this thing in case you were thinking about getting one or just needed another synth to add to your wish list. I'm gonna cover the PerFourmer's architecture, the various voice modes or play modes that it has, see how it can handle being turned into a 4-voice drum machine, and go over some of its limitations. As always, this video is timestamped, so feel free to jump around to whatever section you want. So let's start out with how this thing is laid out. When I first saw it, it sort of reminded me of one of those big studio consoles, just 1,000 knobs that would take me forever to figure out how to use. But just like one of those huge studio consoles, it's basically just one strip or one voice, copied a number of times. You really just need to learn one voice of this to understand how the whole thing operates. If you're familiar with any other synthesizer, there really aren't any surprises here. Voice 1 is broken up into VCO, the sound source, VCF, the filter, envelope generator, attack, decay, sustain, release, an LFO, low frequency oscillator or modulation source, and VCA, the amplifier. In the oscillator section, you can select the waveform and the octave and fine tune it here. You have control over the glide, which I'll demonstrate later, how much you want the envelope to affect the frequency, and if or how you want the LFO to affect the frequency. That knob also lets you set the pulse width modulation when you have certain waves selected. In the filter section, you have a pretty standard control over the cutoff and resonance, how much you want the envelope to affect the filter, and how much you want the LFO to affect the filter. The LFO has a speed control and lets you choose between a reverse saw and square wave, sine wave, and sample and hold. The envelope has pretty standard ADSR controls. If you set the attack at 0, you do get a little click. At first, it was one of those things that I wish wasn't the case, but it's actually sort of useful from time to time, so neutral. The VCA has a few different modes. It can just be turned on as a drone. It has a gate mode, which basically just goes full open and full closed when a trigger is sent to it, and an envelope mode, which will follow the envelope that you set. It has a pan knob because this is a stereo synth, and lastly, a volume knob per voice. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is the tuning switch. You can turn the switch on and it'll just play A440, so you can tune all the rest of your oscillators. Each voice also has an out, which I believe takes that voice out of the main outputs, and also a jack for external instruments or external effects. Now take what I just described and multiply it by 4, and essentially you understand all the knobs and switches for the voices. So now let's move over to the play modes. This is where the synthesizer gets pretty interesting. Mono 1 or M1 turns the PerFourmer into a 4 oscillator mono synth. All the voices are just stacked on top of each other. The great thing about this mode is each voice can have different settings. So you can have 4 different waveforms, detune some of them if you want, mess with the pan of each voice, have different LFO movement on each voice, different envelopes. The ability to create a very unique voice in this mode is something that's pretty special. It's a really powerful way to shape complex, rich timbres, all while staying monophonic. It's also worth mentioning, even if you don't officially select a mono 1 as your play mode, any uncombined channel will basically default to this behavior when it receives MIDI. In mono mode 2 or M2, it's also monophonic, but it works completely differently. Instead of layering the voices, it cycles through them one by one for each note that you play. So when you hit 4 notes in a row, it'll send the first note to voice 1, the second to voice 2, and so on. And then loop back around, sort of like a round robin system. Now, this creates really cool stereo effects if you pan each voice differently. The sound literally jumps around the speakers, and with the voices are set up with different filters, waveforms, or envelopes, the sequence feels really alive. It'll change character with each note. It's especially fun with fast arpeggios or odd time patterns. Your ear starts to hear different melodies just from how the sounds are alternating. Switching between mono 1 and mono 2 on the fly can give you instant variation without changing a single note of your sequence. Now let's talk about duo mode. This is where Performer gets a little clever. In duo mode, the synth splits itself into 2 hybrid voices, each made up of 2 channels. Channel 1 and 2 become one voice, and channel 3 and 4 become another. It's basically just turning the Performer into a synth with 2 oscillators per voice. In duo 1, you're still playing monophonically, meaning only one note at a time, but the voices alternate. So one note might play on channels 1 and 2, the next note on channels 3 and 4, back and forth from there. Sort of like mono mode 2, but now it's alternating 2 more complex voices. This also gives you a cool stereo bouncing effect if you pan the voices differently, or some subtle variation in tone if you've tweaked the channels just slightly differently. It's great, again, for fast arpeggios or sequences. You get motion and variety even if you're playing the same note over and over. Then there's duophonic 2, which means you can play 2 notes at once, one with each hybrid voice. So if you play a 2-note chord, one note will go to voices 1 and 2, and the other note to voices 3 and 4. You'll still get all the same flexibility. You can pan them apart, modulate them differently, treat each voice like a mini synth of its own. It's a great mode for expressive playing, and in a setup where you're not just sequencing, it can make the Performer feel more like just a regular synthesizer. Lastly, there's PLAYMODE, and this basically just turns PerFourmer into a polyphonic synth. In Poly 1, the 4 voices, or the 4 channels, are used just like a traditional polyphonic synthesizer. You can play up to 4 notes at once, and each note gets its own voice. It's basically just a 4-voice analog polysynth. Now, what happens if you play a 5th note? The PerFourmer will steal the oldest note that you're holding and reassign that voice to a new note. There's always a rotation going on behind the scenes. The nice part about Poly 1 is that it remembers what notes you're still holding, and will reuse the freed up voices as you release notes. Poly 2 works almost the same way with one key difference. Poly 2 doesn't keep track of which notes are being held down. So once you play a new note, the voice gets assigned immediately, and the synth doesn't care if the previous one is still technically being played. It's a little more aggressive in how it steals voices, and it can lead to some interesting results, especially with overlapping lines or big chords. And one quick heads up for both modes, since you've only got 4 voices to work with, it's pretty easy to hit the polyphony ceiling. So if you notice that notes are cutting off too abruptly, try shortening the release times on your envelopes. It can really help smooth things out and make the voice stealing a little less noticeable. There are some options that you can change by how the synth behaves by going into the edit section, selecting the parameter you want to change, and either engaging it or disengaging it by pressing the trigger button on the voice that you want to change. Those are listed pretty clearly on the front panel. I won't go into each one because this video will get a little bit longer, but if you're interested, let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to make a companion video that dives deep into each one and how they behave. One thing I find really neat about this synth is that it can be used pretty easily as a drum machine. You can make pretty nice percussive sounds pretty easily. And the ways I find myself using this the most are just straight up using each channel as a different drum voice, with other synths playing the bass line or the lead lines. The other way is to switch 1 or 2 of the channels into a different MIDI channel and having 2 percussive voices and 2 melodic voices. This lets you have a drum and bass line on the same synthesizer. You could also assign a bass to 1 voice, a lead to 1 voice, a kick to 1 voice. I guess you could just do it however you want to do it, but the point is it's versatile. So let's make a cool percussive synth. Saving the best for last, which I guess is pretty dangerous on YouTube because I don't know if you're still watching. My absolute favorite thing about the PerFourmer is right there in the title. This thing wants to be performed, and its layout makes it really fun. Run a sequence to it and just turn knobs, mess with the play modes in real time. For someone like me who comes from a classical background, it forces me to let go of the notes I'm playing and get to focus more on the sounds that those notes are making. I can spend time making a really cool sequence, but then really enjoy making that sequence sound different with every performance, with every twist of each knob. So I've been over all the reasons why I love this thing. Let's get negative. Because while I do love this thing, for its price, which is about $1,600, in this category, there are some things that you don't get. There's no keyboard, which might be a big deal to you. No patch memory. This one could be a really big deal for some people. If you create a great sounding piece, you better remember how you made it, or sketch it out on a piece of paper, or take a picture, because you can't save it. There's no built-in sequencer, no built-in arpeggiator, so at the very least you need another piece of gear to use it, whether that's a computer or a sequencer or keyboard. It can't really be used on its own. I mean, it can with the drone mode, but you get it. While each voice does have an LFO, it's pretty limited in its routing. Unlike other synths that can take a single LFO to modulate a variety of destinations in, say, a mod matrix, the LFOs are assigned to what they're assigned to, and that's it. There aren't any built-in effects, which isn't a big deal for me, but you know, I don't know if it is for you, so there you go. And I think the biggest reason you'd want to really think about whether this is worth it for you are the other synths in this price point that do have one or most of the things that this one doesn't. The TO5 and the Take 5 are right around this price point. They have a keyboard, a mod matrix, built-in effects, 5 voices instead of 4, 2 envelopes, patch memory, and it's pretty much the same price. Also, the TO5 and Take 5 now have desktop versions for a few $100s less. No keyboard, but no keyboard on the PerFourmer either. So the Korg Prologue and Minilog both come in under the price of the PerFourmer and are really great polysynths with a keyboard, onboard effects, patch memory. I think the Prologue has 16 voice polyphony, so a little bit more than 4. The Sequential Forum just got released, and that's a pretty interesting thing right around this price. And don't get me started on Behringer synths. I'm actually kind of a fan, by the way. Leave your hate in the comments. Basically, if you're just looking at functions and bells and whistles, the PerFourmer has a hard time competing at this price point. But what all those synths don't have, in my opinion, is the experience that you get playing it. I know that you can sequence all of those other synths externally and play the knobs, but it really isn't as inviting. I know I could use a modulation matrix to get fancy with how I modulate different things, but I like the simplicity of the PerFourmer. At the end of the day, I just resonate with it. And if you're someone who likes to perform your music instead of just sequence it and record it, it's definitely worth considering. And it just really sounds amazing. Like, it just does. I'm a big fan. I hope you found this look at the Vermona PerFourmer useful. I'd love to know what you think about it down in the comments. Maybe you've had a different experience with it or a different take. I want to hear it. Well, read it. If you've got any questions about something that I didn't address, I really do try to respond to every comment. So, leave it down below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.